Hi guys, thanks so much for joining me again. Today we're going to take a trip around Lightroom showing you how I've taken this landscape photograph, taken on the Nikon D850 and transformed it with Lightroom with some simple work with sliders and local adjustments into this. So hopefully you guys like that image, and working alongside me over my shoulder as I talk you through the steps involved, you'll be able to apply a similar approach to your landscape photography. So without further ado guys, let's dive right into Lightroom. So we're going to take a look at how I transformed this raw file here into something more like this. So this is a Lightroom only edit. I then took it slightly further in Photoshop. I'm not going to show you what I did in Photoshop in this tutorial. If you would like me to, I can. Please leave me a comment below just saying, yeah, I'd love it if you'd make a video on that. But today we're going to focus on how we create this image here from this raw file. So let's just look at the two side by side as we get a direct comparison. The main things we're going to do is we've brought in a warming halo through here and brightened this area here, whilst at the same time bringing in interest to the rocks here. We've then increased the visual interest of the stream coming through here, and we've done that by just increasing the exposure really, and that was painted in. And then through here we've just brought in a little more detail into these rocks here. The mountains in the background have had the clarity increased there as well. So there's a two-pronged attack to how we're going to tackle this image here. We're going to have global adjustments, but also I feel the real key to creating an image that is next level is to actually use localized adjustments, so you can really guide your viewer's attention where you want it to go. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Actually, as a point of interest, if we now compare these two images side by side, you can see the one on the left, that is with pretty much just the global adjustments, and the one on the right is where I've actually utilized the local adjustment tools such as radial adjustments and linear adjustments within Lightroom. So there is a difference, and both photographs look nice, and it depends how far you want to take things and to your own personal preference, but I will do my best to recreate this image here when I show you what I did. So first thing, let's dive right into the develop module, and as a starting point, let's warm up the image, and let's do that by getting hold of the temperature and just bringing that somewhere that's a warmer kind of feel to this image, something like that. Now if we bring the exposure up, we can see that we've got a whole heap of detail to play with in this file. You can see in the highlights there's still heaps of information, and if we push that right up in the shadows, we've got heaps of data as well. And that's the beauty of the Nikon D850, is the files that are coming out of that are absolutely exquisite and just a joy to work with. But if you don't have files from a D850, as long as you're working in RAW, you are going to be able to recover highlights and shadows as long as you've photographed it correctly in the first place. So all of this that I'm going to show you now is applicable. So first of all, let's bump the exposure up just a bit so we can start to see a little more information through the shadow area here, to sort of normalize through the whole image and bring down the sky just a little bit. Let's just reduce the exposure here, and that's just going to help to give us almost like a ceiling to the frame. Here it's very bright and your eye just falls out of the frame, but as we darken that down, that helps to get the value of the sky to be similar to what's in the foreground. To take that further, we can even bring a linear filter up from the bottom and just start to increase the exposure on that as well. Perhaps just bring the shadows up slightly there. Nice. Okay, let's start to actually work with the radial filter. So we want to brighten this area here. So if I just draw a radial filter out, and we're increasing the exposure at the moment, what we can also do is increase the temperature, so we're starting to warm up that sun flare coming through. And just by grabbing the sliders and just bring the temperature up and the tint towards the magenta side, we're starting to do that. We can also create a bit of a flare effect coming in through here that will be more localized, so I'll make that smaller, and we're actually going to reduce the clarity on that one. So I'm just going to drag that down. Can you see around the edge of the sort of cliff hill here where it's all rocky and sharp? If we, rather than going this way with the clarity, if we bring it down the other way, that actually softens that flare that's coming through from the sun quite nicely, and I think that's quite a nice effect there. Over here on the left, up in the top left corner, I feel like we probably need to bring those clouds more towards a blue toning, so the sky isn't as orangey. Can you see as I move the temperature to the left, that introduces some blue. We don't need to go too crazy, but just enough so that we're framing our whole image on the top line with blue. I think that's quite nice. So a couple of the other things we want to do is increase the contrast on this rocky area here. So if I draw another radial filter there, and we'll keep the exposure up, bring the contrast up and the clarity as well, but what I'm not enjoying at the moment is as the clarity increases, our blacks push further to black and our whites really start to bleach out, and that is not the look we want. We want to increase the clarity but without bleaching out. So if I bring that up and then just work in with our highlights here, we get the best of both worlds. We're not bleaching out, but we are increasing that localized contrast there. Clarity I find does, well, the contrast and clarity are doing two very different things, and by playing around there you can get a feel for what look you want, and we're just going to feather that even more. I always try and feather what I'm doing quite aggressively so that it's a softer look in the image, and you can't see the edging of the adjustments that you've made. So we've brought some more interest out in the rocks here. Let's also highlight over the mountains in the background, and we don't necessarily need to brighten them, but I certainly want to increase that clarity, and that's really going to give them a bit of visual pop there. That's quite nice. So now we've done some localized adjustments, I tell you what else we'll do the river through here. So at the moment all I really want to do is just bring up the exposure. I'm not too worried about contrast or anything, and just by painting over, following the line of that stream through there, we can start to bring more visual emphasis onto that, and we don't have to just leave that as high as that. Sometimes it's nice just to push that quite high and just get a feel for what you're doing visually, and then you can always just tame it back afterwards. The other thing I would like to do is actually colour that, and I'm going to do that using the tint and temperature, just so that it almost looks like it's reflecting some of this orangey glow from the clouds and the sun there. I'm happy with that. So let's get on with some global adjustments now. So we're going to just close down that. I like to work in a mode where I'm only seeing one palette at a time. So if I open up the tone curve, for instance, the basic disappears. I just find that's a nice, neat way to work. So what we're going to do, we're going to increase the contrast as a starting point, and as we increase the contrast and push the highlights brighter and the blacks and shadows darker, we're going to sort of compensate for that using the highlights, shadows, whites and blacks. So I'll often find myself pulling down the highlights just to retain all of that detail through the clouds. Our shadows, if we bring these shadows up, we're going to see all of that detail in the foreground and the rocks, but we don't need to be that aggressive with it, but we can see what we're doing, perhaps somewhere around there. Now whites at the moment, we can actually see, if we click this little triangular icon up here, we can see that we're just bleaching out here, so we can either pull the highlights down a little further, but I don't really want to do that, or just bring the whites down just to protect that. So let's bring the whites down to about there. I'm happy just with a minute bit of clipping, that's fine. And the blacks, if we pull those down, we increase that contrast again. but I'm happy just to leave that kind of where it is. Not kind of where it is, I've left it exactly where it is. So bit of clarity never goes astray, particularly on a landscape image. You don't want to push it too far, otherwise things just go cray cray. So let's go for about +13, that's nice. In terms of our vibrance and our saturation, I would prefer to actually saturate this, but I don't want to saturate it using the saturation slider. If you do that, it just looks a little fakey, whereas you can kind of be a little more aggressive with the vibrance slider, get some nice colors coming out there. Yeah, I'm happy kind of pushing that quite heavily, and then even just tame off the saturation just a little bit. Nice. From here, I'm going to leave the tone curve just for now, and what I'm going to do is actually come in and talk directly to the colors here. What I'm wanting to do is unify the whole image and go for an orange and blue tonality, and you can see we've got a fair bit of kind of green and yellow going on here, and I just want to push that more towards the orange or oranges. So let me just grab the yellows, bring those. Don't want to do it too much so it looks fake again, but just enough so that we're tying in the shadow, oh sorry, the highlight that's happening over here, tie that in nicely with what will be coming from the sun. And I think by pushing the hue of the yellows over more towards orange, that's helping us to do that nicely. Do we need to do that with our oranges? Yeah, let's just tie that in. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So let's move on from there. Actually, what we can do as well, just grab the blues. Can you see how they're kind of quite dark up in the sky here? I'm wondering whether we can add a little more punch to our blues. Let's saturate them and bring the brightness up with that luminance slider. Yeah, and that just gives us a little more separation between this dark edge of this hill line here and the sky, which I quite like. Split toning, not for every image, but for this one I'm liking the idea of bringing in some oranges through the highlights and then through the shadows, just some bluey teals through here. Yeah, just blue really, isn't it? Not teal at all. Just let's go with those. Those are the default Lightroom swatches that you can just click on, and they work pretty well most of the time. From there you can adjust things if you like. Ooh, I quite like going more towards the purples actually with the shadows. That's quite nice. Somewhere around there, that will be fine. For the detail side of things, we're pretty sharp. We've shot this with a nice lens. It's shot with a 16 to 35mm Nikon lens on, as I say, the Nikon D850. The file is so nice and sharp before any real sharpening's been applied, but because our sensor is so jam-packed with pixels, we can actually push the sharpening quite high and also the radius, and we're getting a lovely sharp image. Let's dial that back just a little bit, and by putting a little bit of noise reduction in there, we'll keep the file nice and clean, and so we'll be able to print this bad boy huge, and it's still going to look great. Lens correction, I always remove the chromatic aberration just in case any is being introduced. That's that fringing that you sometimes see around the very edge of the frame. You normally get this with cheaper lenses, but you can see some. I've taken it off there. There's a slight greening around the edge there that if I press remove chromatic aberration again, it's just going to go. So it's not doing a whole heap, but it is helping us. So off and on. Yeah, it's subtle, but it's not a bad thing to utilize. And then I'm going to enable the profile correction to see what's happening. And yes, it is geometrically correcting what's happening in the lens, but do you know what? I'm happy leaving it exactly as it was, straight from the lens onto the sensor. There's no point stretching, destroying any pixel data that we don't need to. So I'm going to leave that exactly as it is. I forgot to mention that camera calibration, which is a really important part when you're starting the process to make sure you've got the correct profile. Usually I will make a custom profile for each of my camera bodies, and usually for 3 or 4 different lighting situations. In this instance, I'm just going with the Adobe standard as a base on this one, keeping it real super simple. So why doesn't this photo look like our other version I showed you? Well, there's a couple of things. Firstly, I've done this from scratch, so it is going to look slightly different anyway. I've not done this as an exact formula, I've just done it kind of by feel as I've recreated what was happening here. But the main difference is using the very powerful tool that is curves. So what we're going to do with our curves is we're going to actually reduce the depth of the blacks. You can actually see here that they're almost like a dark blue rather than an actual black, and we're also going to look at the highlight here, which is a very yellowy orange. We're going to recreate a yellowy orange, and using the split toning, you might think, oh, we'll just put some orange in with that and that will affect the highlights. If you've got pure white, it's still going to stay pure white. So the way I get around that, if I want to create a highlight that is no longer white but is yellow, we do that through the tone curve. And from our channel, rather than just working in the RGB channel, if we come to our blue channel, you can actually grab that top point and just bring it down. That's going to pull the highlights that are normally blue or have blue colouring in them towards that yellow. And if I go all the way, you can see exactly what it's doing. So we just want to find that sweet spot where we're happy, and because of the nature of this image, I don't mind being quite aggressive with that yellowing effect, and I quite like that. The other thing we've done was introduce some blues into the very dark black. So I'm just going to grab what is representing the black point on this channel and just shift it up slightly. I don't want to go too far with this because it's going to look really funky, and I'm not talking cool disco funky, I'm talking weird as funky. Let's just move that up a little bit, and if we go back to our RGB curve here, I'm going to boost up the black. So it's going to do similar to what we were doing with the blue channel. It's going to make it a brighter version. We're going to bring those blacks up just ever so slightly, and I'll leave the white point where it is because we've already addressed that through the blue channel. Bring that down to yellow. And the other thing I want to do is just create a slight bit of contrast, not too much. So I can bring this down, keep the midtones kind of where they were, and just protect the highlights a little bit. So that's subtle, but it's if we turn that off and back on, you can certainly see that it's giving color grading to that photo, which I quite like, and it's also boosting up the blacks. And what that's going to do as well is just really help us out when we come to the printing process, so that we're not losing detail in a pure black. We've still got some interest going on, and the fact that we've color toned that a slight blue, I like that in this instance. And we're looking much closer to the original photo that I showed you, which was this one. We're just slightly darker there, aren't we? And a little more blue up in that top left hand corner, sorry, top right hand corner. So I'm going to just address that, so we can come back to our exposure and bring that down. Yeah, I think that looks much better already. Looks more dramatic, and as you decrease exposure, the colors tend to become richer as well. I'm now going to address the color toning in the top corner of the sky. I actually want to make it more blue, so if I bring out a radial filter across there, and then I just grab the temperature slider and bring that towards blue. See how all of a sudden it's put a whole heap of blue in the sky? I don't want to go that far, but it's certainly, in my opinion, helping to bring a nice rich blue into that sky. I may even just bring the exposure up ever so slightly, and we'll probably feather that right out as well. There we go. So if I drag that away and put it back, we can see what it's doing. So without it and with it. Now a lot of this stuff, this is where, in my opinion, photography becomes an art form. It's not a you must do this, you must do that. You've got to feel it, feel what's right for you. And in my for me, I prefer that bluer sky in that top right hand corner, and because it was the only place where blue is, what I'm doing is actually duplicating that radial filter exactly as it is, and I've brought it down to the bottom left. So we're just introducing a little bit of blue actually into this region here on the rocks, so we've got a sense of balance from top right and top left, and I'm really liking that now. So I don't want to absolutely do this tutorial to death, so I think we're going to leave that there. And one thing I am so I'll leave it there and I'll carry on. I think that was just a little too overexposed and calling too much attention to those rocks through there. So guys, I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to say thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this tutorial. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you would like to see more of my processing through Adobe Lightroom or Adobe Photoshop, either of those, or my whole workflow, just let me know, leave a comment below. I photograph weddings, I photograph landscapes, I photograph automotive, I photograph products and portraits, architecture. I've got some videos on some of that stuff already, but I'm really wanting to help the photographic community with the knowledge that I have, and I just want to share that with you guys. I love teaching, so help me continue this journey, help me to help you, help me help you, help me help you by hitting that like button. Please subscribe. It shows me that you're watching, shows me that you're enjoying what I'm doing, and shows me by subscribing that you want to see more content from me, and that will just help me stay on target with this. I'm doing this stuff currently just for the love of doing it. I'm getting like peanuts from YouTube at the moment, and I'm turning down other professional gigs so that I can do this. So please, if you are enjoying it, let me know, and as I say, subscribe, and I'd love to share some more content with you. Thank you so much, and as I say, let me know what you would like me to see me process next, whether it's wedding photography, more landscapes, architecture, whatever. Please let me know, and from there I can create some video content. Cheers guys. As I said at the beginning, we took a landscape photograph taken on the Nikon D850 and took it from its raw state right through to a finished image. I've also done a version which I'm going to show you now, which is the photoshopped version. You can see it if I switch between the two photos here and here. You can actually see the differences that I've made. Subtle, but if you would like me to make a video to show you what I've done there, just to finish off that whole process, let me know in the comments below. Love to hear from you. So thanks ever so much for taking the time to watch it. If you have enjoyed this video, please help me out. Help me by supporting the channel just with a like on the video and a subscribe. That will be benefiting you to the max as well, because if I get enough subscribers, I am just going to keep going, producing content like this and just sharing all my knowledge. The next question for you guys is, let me know below, what would you like me to show you next in a processing video? Would you like me to show you how to process wedding photos? Would you prefer portrait photography, landscapes again, product photography, architecture? Whatever it is, I've probably shot it, and at a professional level as well. So let me know, and I'll show you some of my insights with how I deal with each of those things using Adobe Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop.